now. All right, this is 13 KEIN, Montana's Comedy Network. This is your host, Christopher Smith, and we're doing a special news interview with upcoming Governor Tanner Smith and Lieutenant Governor Randy Pinocci. They're running for the governor and lieutenant governor position here at the state of Montana. And the big thing about this is, gentlemen, I've heard you two are grassroots and front runners in this election. How's the feedback been from the citizens on this?
Well, it's been exceptional because we are a grassroots, organization. In every pocket of this state, we have a lot of people coming out supporting us, asking for signs. That's how we know it's grassroots, when we can't keep up with the signs they want and the pamphlets they want printed. So it's grassroots, 100% top to bottom. Greg has the money, we have the message, and that message is resonating with the folks.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful, great message. And so how do you feel about this, Randy?
Well, I've been to one end of the state to the other. I've spent several days, especially in the eastern part of the state, where I represent them as a public service commissioner. And they're reaching out because they say, hey, we think you're doing a great job as a public service commissioner. Tell us some of the issues that you think are in front of you running as lieutenant governor and governor with Tanner. And by the time I'm done with the conversation, I can't keep up with the sign locations. So I think that the grassroots is absolutely motivated, and that's your proof right there. I don't see any signs up for our opponent, and I've completely lost track of where the signs are because I can give them to someone and I have no idea where they're going up. But as I'm traveling, I'm seeing them everywhere. So that's a good indication.
Yeah, that's amazing. So welcome to the show. We've got some questions for you two today, and the hope is that that our listeners, the 200,000 listeners that we have, can really get to know you guys. A little bit of history on our station. We've been around for 100 years. So 100 years old, 200,000 listeners. I think it's time we really start getting the news out there. First question. Personally, I think that this state is in a crisis right now. Do you agree? And in general, what is your position? Tanner?
Yes, I completely concur with that. We've been in a crisis now for about 3 years. The young gal that was raped in Missoula 3 years ago from the Middle Eastern gentleman, that was a crisis for her. We have a crisis with our property taxes. That's a crisis for our pocketbooks, our parental rights, our water rights, right on down the list. We are in a crisis. I would ask your listeners, are they better off than they were 3 years ago? And I know that I'm not, just being a normal folk out here working for a living. I know that everything's gone up exponentially financially for me, and we're also losing our way of life is slipping away. We all feel it. So yes, it's a crisis in all different fronts. Mata Fuel Fitness was shot and murdered. We have our women and children that are getting accosted by illegal aliens and homeless folks. And these are all things that need to be nipped in the butt, because we're going to lose our state if we don't do a course correction and change forks in the road.
And so you don't feel that the current administration's handling that properly?
Their inaction speaks volumes. Like I say in all my speeches, we need to treat Montana like we do our homes and our property. We wouldn't let strangers on our property without questioning them. We certainly wouldn't let these illegals and these strangers, badger our women and children. And it's no different when you take that and you just blow it up to a city or a town. We need to protect our women and children. I'm old school when it comes to that regard. And there's just a whole litany of issues. That's what got me into politics, was running for the legislature and winning, and then going to Helena. And I actually announced I was going to run for governor about 2 weeks into the session, because I saw firsthand the bad actors and the bad policies that are directly ruining our state. And we're going to be California, Washington, Oregon if we don't change course.
Yeah, definitely don't want to be that. Randy, how do you feel about this?
I'm your public service commissioner in the largest district in the state. I also have more hydroelectric dams than any other public service commissioner. And folks, you've noticed that your energy bills are higher than normal. In fact, they're the highest in Montana's history. And I've got some more news for you. They're going to go higher than they are. And the answer is really quite simple. If you allow me to produce more energy in Montana, I could bring the cost down. This is why I want coal units 1 and 2 back online. I need to build another hydroelectric dam or 2. If I could add a turbine at Gibson Reservoir, which currently doesn't have one, I could generate electricity. And I should have been doing this 50, 60 years ago, folks. When I bring power in from out of state, we have to pay 10 times more for it. And the truth is, we don't produce enough electricity to even supply our state. And we have record construction. We have record growth. And then they want to bring in electric cars and semis. I simply don't have the power for it. So as a result, your energy rates are going to go up. Montana could be producing far more electricity than it needs. I could bring the price down and we could be an energy exporter. And not only in electricity, we could do this with natural gas if you let me drill. I could export more of our coal. There is nothing wrong with having coal produce energy, especially with carbon capture, which has no emission at all. And I'm telling you, folks, this is a crisis mode. Your energy bills are going to go higher than they are now, and they're already the highest they've ever been. And I just don't think the governor's office has an answer for any of this.
Great. Can I also add to that, Chris?
Yeah, go for it.
That people also need to realize that, like, when Northwestern Energy raises your rates, they're covering their losses for these attorneys that they have to hire. Whenever there's a case like the Laurel gas plant and Northwestern Energy gets sued, well, then they need to hire lawyers and attorneys. Well, all that money comes out of the ratepayers' pocketbook. People need to realize that when the left sues, these corporations, whether it's a co-op or Northwestern Energy, that those attorney fees are just passed on to the consumer. Higher inputs always equals higher outputs. So people need to be keenly aware of that.
Yeah, well, they certainly do like to sue, don't they? So this kind of leads into my next question. Why are you running for this position, and what do you bring to the table?
That's for me. That's a good question. I bring 30 years of working in the private sector, in Montana all my life. I'm born and raised here. There are 21 different government entities that I have to answer to every day. When they say jump, I have to ask how high and where would they like me to jump to. I am in the trenches. I deal with this from a state government, having them tell me what to do every day. I'm also a father of 5 kids. I had my first wife, the mother of my first 3 kids actually passed away at 45 from alcoholism. So I have a whole life experience that a lot of people don't have. Being in the private sector, losing a loved one, raising kids, being a single parent. I'm not your textbook, multi-billionaire like our opponent in this. I'm Montana genuine, 100% born and raised, made mistakes, learn from those mistakes. And what you get is what you see. It's 100%. There's no one that loves this state more than I do.
Good. And so you're definitely not from out of state.
Nope. No. And that's why I feel this draw to do this, because this state is my home. I'm not a millionaire that can move up and move to the next best place. This is ground zero for me. We have to save this state because I have nowhere else to go to. The Montana that my kids are being raised in here in Kalispell is nothing like Stevensville that I was raised in. And there's just a whole litany of issues that we see, why we're losing our state. And it's all stuff that can be fixed, but it needs to be fixed now before it gets way too out of hand.
Good answer. So Randy, how about you? Why are you running for the position of lieutenant governor, and what do you bring to the table?
Well, a good start is, I served with Conrad Burns as a statewide director while I was a U.S. Senator, and he convinced me that I needed to serve in the legislature. And so was Tanner. And, folks, Greg Gianforte never served in the legislature. My family immigrated here from Italy to go to the highest paying jobs in the world in Butte, Montana, and that's where I was born. So pretty hardworking family, and I've been that way my whole life. And I'll tell you, serving in the legislature is the type of experience that people should be, moving up the ladder. When we don't do that, we then see leaders out of touch with Montana. Something that happened in the last session, I think, is very important for the listeners to understand, is a good amount of the bills sent to the governor's desk by a supermajority of Republicans. Well, he vetoed them. And I think that's a good indication that he's out of touch with the legislature, which he never served in. Legislators all over the state are endorsing Tanner and myself because of reasons like that. And that's a good indication that the governor's just out of touch and we need a change. So I really encourage you folks to be voting by June 4th. Either go get an absentee ballot or make sure you're voting in the primary.
Oh, most definitely. So that kind of leads into my next question. Tanner, I'll let you have this one. How do you feel about the job that Governor Gianforte is currently doing, and what do you think could be done differently?
Well, your listeners need to realize that Greg Gianforte is a Chamber of Commerce Republican. Okay, I'm a conservative Republican. Your Chamber of Commerce Republicans, they're all about creating jobs, no matter where those jobs may be. You know, what prompted me to run for the legislature was a marijuana dispensary going next to my kids' school. And that's a huge no-no, obviously. It's hard enough to raise kids. But a Chamber of Commerce Republicans, they don't care about where the jobs are created. You know, medical marijuana is fine, but creating jobs in that environment with the recreational and then not regulating them, that was the biggest mistake that Greg could have ever made for our state. I'll just touch on this a little bit. Right now in Montana, we have 4 times more dispensaries per capita than Colorado. There's 400 dispensaries in Montana for 1 million people. Colorado has 520 for 7 million people. So that's why we're seeing the saturation, with the recreational drug use. And the more people that use, the more people will abuse, and the more people, we're going to lose to marijuana, drugs, and opioids. When they move on to the next stuff. That's just statistically factual. That is not my opinion. That was the first mistake he made. And then with the property taxes, I saw firsthand, your true conservatives like myself, we had plans to fix the property tax issue by using acquisition value. There's a lot of tools that we could have used. I'm of the mindset that if the state government doesn't get the taxes in the first place, they can't find ways to spend it. But
Right.
we went into this 2023 cycle, and they had already had that money spent. I use the analogy: the cake was already baked. We got to pick the frosting and the sprinkles because Greg, working with the Solutions Caucus, which is the Rhino Republicans, and the Democrats, they already earmarked and allocated all that money. A conservative like myself, if the government never gets it in the first place, then they can't waste it. And there's ways to do that using acquisition value, not taxing Social Security benefits, veterans benefits, not taxing overtime. Anything over 40 hours a week, the state won't touch that. And that way, the state never gets that money in the first place. There's a lot of solutions we had, but they already wanted that money, and that's the same reason. 2 times now we've called for a special session, and we can't. We don't have the votes, to call for a special session because there's only 40 of us in the House that are your true conservatives, and Greg's in on it because he's getting lobbied. Medicaid expansion is coming up in 2025. That's the dirty little secret now that they promised the hospitals all that money because the hospitals need to backfill the coffers. All the COVID money's run out. So they built these new wings with the COVID money. Now they need to backfill with Medicaid expansion money. And that's why you're not getting your money back this go around. And until something changes at the governor's office and we have a true conservative in there, it's not going to get better. My Lieutenant Governor Randy's exactly right. Your energy prices are going to continue to go up. Your taxes are going to continue to be where they're at until something changes in Helen at the governor's office.
Let's talk more about that. Property tax increases. So you can foresee them if we elect Governor Gianforte or re-elect him. You can foresee those increasing even further. And let's say we elect you, which is a pretty strong probability here, given that you're the front runner. How will you address that issue?
Well, I said on house taxation. So these are things we've tried to do. Acquisition value is the key. Whatever Chris Smith paid for his house, that's what you get taxed. Just because your neighbor paid 4 times as much, the refugee from wherever state they moved, just because they paid more for their house doesn't mean that yours went up commensurately because you don't want to sell your house. Acquisition value is the key. We tried doing that. If he massaged the 1.35 versus the 0.94 percentage, that's kind of a mute point because when they use fair value, when things have quadrupled in their fair market value, that little fraction of a percentage point, that's not enough to make a difference. There was $3 billion of surplus. Greg gave $3 billion of surplus. Greg gave 1 billion back. But they're smart because they knew not everybody would sign up for the $675 rebate. So that was $200 million that was left in the state coffers for them to spend on their NGOs and all their little have earmarked. That's the dirty secret. And I go back and say a $675 rebate, when your taxes have gone up double, That's not a rebate. That's a net loss. People lost money. That the $675 rebate was just buying votes basically, because right away people got their tax bills and most of them went up 40%. So
Yeah.
it's disingenuous to say the least. But these are all things that can be fixed. We're looking at the same amount of surplus going into this next biennium. There's already about $1 billion of surplus. So that money needs to go back to the folks. I'm all for Tabor. I'm sure Randy agrees. Some kind of taxpayer bill of rights that the minute there is overcollection of taxes, that money goes back to where it came from. If that's income tax, those people get those rebates and income tax rebates. If there's too much paid in on property taxes, that goes back to property taxes. That was the other shell game that Greg played with the property taxes, is a lot of that was income tax that was redistributed to property owners. Well, that leaves out all your renters. And you have to remember that renters aren't just 18 to 24-year-old kids. I had buddies that sold their place for $2-3 million that were renting, that pay a lot of money in income tax. They never got any property tax rebate. So the money needs to go back in the form that it came in. That's what's fair. That's the way it should be. When I do the digging for somebody and they give me a $100,000 draw, if the project only costs $80,000, I don't get to take the $20,000 and do work for their neighbor because it feels right. That money goes back to the homeowner, and that's how we need to start running the state.
Good to hear. It's really good, actually. It's a sigh of relief. Moving forward here. I've got a couple of list of questions here. Just kind of moving forward. This actually leads into a question that we get from a lot of our listeners, which is, we've heard rumors that Governor Gianforte is basically endorsing rhino Republicans. How do you feel about that?
Well, Greg's worked himself into a corner where the Gianforte administration has promised the lobbyists, the Montana Health Association or Montana Hospital Association, he's promised them this money for Medicaid expansion. So he's worked himself into a corner where he needs to have those rhinos, those soft ones that'll carry the water for him in the legislature. So what we're seeing is everybody he endorsed, he threw a couple conservatives in there that we know we're going to win anyway, but the bulk of it was rhinos that will sign on to the Medicaid expansion. They will vote with the Democrats, and then Greg will have plausible deniability and political cover to say, hey, the legislature passed this. I don't agree with it either, but we got to go with it because we the people have spoke. When all along that's been the plan, that whole side has had, and this goes back to 2015 with the first Medicaid expansion. So yeah, I don't like rhinos. Rhinos are the problem why we have the issues we do. It's really frustrating for conservatives like Randy and myself that are conservatives to be lumped in with Republicans, because the Montana we're growing up in today, the things we're seeing are not part of our Republican platform. And it is because of the rhinos that are calling themselves conservatives, but they're not having conservative policies. It's frustrating.
Yeah, definitely. So the ultimate difference, you would agree, between the rhinos and the conservatives is that the Democrats are calling you guys the far right. Is that correct?
That's it. Yeah.
When really, you're just normal people.
Well, there's the meme we've all seen that they call us far right. We've just been right so far. And the way it is, because, and what we're asking is just tried and true conservative principles that we know work. Give the money back to the folks and they're going to spend that money. I'm an excavation contractor. I've never worked for a poor person. The more money the rich people have, the more money the rich people spend. And then we all benefit from that.
So common sense?
Common sense. Yeah.
That's awesome.
It's not anymore.
Yeah, it's not really a big thing anymore, but it should be. Like, I think we should bring it back.
Well, and this goes back to how we were raised in Montana. There was stuff that we were taught in school that we actually had to pass legislation this last session, like consumer ed we took at Stevensville, civics classes, all the stuff that prepare young adults, critical thinking. We had that in high school, back in 30 years ago. Well, we had to actually pass legislation to say, hey, you need to teach kids about the Constitution. That's how we've digressed as a society. And if give Randy and I 8 years as governor, we will get back on the right track, because we're only letting down our kids if we allow this to continue.
That's a good point. So, speaking about kids, we've heard a lot on the Kolstad family in that case. Can you talk a little bit more about that and why that's a hotbed topic?
Well, these are the issues that we can't have happen in Montana. Okay, I have 5 kids of myself. In my household, we have 8. We have a blended family. And when we discipline our children, we expect that we're not going to have somebody come in and take our kids away from us the way that happened, with that situation. And this goes back to what Randy was saying about Greg vetoing bills. House Bill 37 would have called for a judge to have some oversight before a child was removed. Well, Greg vetoed that bill. It's these little things that are unforced errors that his administration does that leads to these issues. Having House Bill 37 on the books would have had a judge there to say, no, this is what's going on. Bump the brakes on this. Don't bring the cops in. And what's worse is we also passed House Bill 676, which said that we as parents have the right to bring our children up at how we want, whatever religion we want, whatever that may look like, whether it's Christian or Muslim or whatever that looks like. Well, Greg didn't adhere to that, and his CPS didn't adhere to that. And all it takes is one rogue CPS, or a couple, like in this case, to take everything off the rails and pull that child out. These are the things that don't happen if you have a conservative governor. As governor, I will be the CEO of the state, and I would have intervened and said, nope, CPS workers, you're fired. We want to give that child all the resources that she needs, whatever's going on mentally with that child, but we're not removing kids from Montana families. The issue arises is the left wants to blame parents if the kids do something wrong, because the parents are ultimately responsible. But this is a complete opposite reversal, a complete inversion, where they've sided with the child and the parents don't have any rights. This is just the hypocrisy that we always see, from the left and with this woke agenda they have.
All right, so just kind of taking a step back on the Kolstad family there. For our listeners that don't know what that case is all about, can you kind of give us the Cliff Notes version, or how do we say this, the Tanner Smith Notes version?
Yeah, this is the Cliff Notes synopsis. The Kolstad family in Glasgow had a 14-year-old child that was a girl, and she was at work being supported, and at her job and at school, she was trying to transfer over to be a boy. So what happened was it came to a head one day when the folks found out about this. They said, we work at your job anymore because they're condoning this behavior that we as parents don't like. So the child said she tried committing suicide. They rushed her to the hospital. Come to find out she had not drank Drano and taken, excessive ibuprofen, like she said. So at that moment right there, the CPS should have said, nope, the child lied. Go home and get disciplined by your folks. We all care about you. We all love you. We all want to do what's best for you. Let's get you the mental health we need. But what the state did was they doubled down on supporting the child and this transition. So much so that the Kolstads basically had to agree to call her a him, or else they would lose custody of their kids. And the Kolstads did exactly what I would have done. Once you're 18 and out of the house, what you do with your life is your choice. But as long as you're under our roof, as parents, what we say is the law. We have 3 daughters in our blended family. My oldest daughter, Addison, she's often called my house a prison. And I say, well, yes, it is. And I'm the warden. When I say 10:30 is curfew, that means 10:30 is curfew. Because there's only, this goes back to my high school coach, George Wasser. There's only 2 things you're doing after 10 o'clock at night, and they'll both get you in trouble. And as parents, if we have a curfew for our children, we need to know that the state has our back on how we're going to raise and discipline our kids. So what happened, the child was removed from the house, brought to Wyoming because the Billings clinics were all full, to treat whatever mental issue she had going on. The child went to Wyoming, then ultimately went to Canada to live with her estranged biological mother that she hasn't seen in 7 years. So the child is in Canada right now, and the Kolstads are minus one kid. And those are things we can't, that has set a really bad precedent in the state. There's on TikTok, if you go, there's things to do, instructions basically on how to go through with that same exact situation. and that's dangerous. It's dangerous waters that we're in right now.
Well, that seems really dangerous. Anytime you take a child outside the country, technically our courts no longer have jurisdiction.
Yep.
Wow. Randy, we haven't heard from you a bit. What's your take on this?
I think that the family unit in Montana is sacred ground, and we can never have law enforcement involved with parents' decisions on how they're raising their children. And I think that's exactly what we've seen here. And we need leadership to support that. And it seems to me that Greg Gianforte and Lieutenant Governor Christian Juris are in support of standing against the parents' rights here. And this is the crisis I'm talking about. And again, folks, if you Christians out there are concerned about this issue, I'm reaching out to the Christians that don't have the plans to vote in the primary. Look, it's this government's your government. You get the government you deserve. You better get out there and vote.
Thank you. That's a great message, Randy. So maybe we'll touch a little bit more on that. We've also heard rumors about Christian Juris has some kind of input on this case as well. Do you know anything about that?
Well, from what I heard, and I've spoken with the Colsteads, was Greg tasked Christian Juris with looking into this case. So, that adds a whole layer of other issues that we see where a lieutenant governor is looking at, private family documents. These aren't just court papers, because she's kind of circumventing the system and talking right with the CPS workers. And that's alarming as well. That's government overreach at a level we have never seen. I'd just also like to add that, when issues like this arise, as parents, if we don't have any recourse, that's another issue the Colsteads have had, is they have no other recourse with a gag order that was put on them by the judge there in Glasgow. They weren't allowed to speak to anybody. They weren't allowed to talk about this, and if I can earn the votes of the folks out there and become your next governor, this is one of the issues where you need to lead on these things. The minute that Greg or Christian talk to the attorneys, then they're not leading, they're following. And some of these issues like this are so cut and dry that as a leader, that decision is super easy to make. The child stays in Montana, period. Once our elected officials talk to attorneys first and see what's the legal ramifications on this, then they're no longer leading. Then they're listening to the attorneys. Well, then the attorneys are leading the state. And with situations like this that are so black and white and so cut and dried, we need to have a leader in Helen in the governor's office that will just stand up for the parents. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah, well, in this country, parental rights are like they're king. As far as I know, parents have the ultimate right to control what happens with their children. So, kind of shifting gears a little bit here. We've been talking a little bit about, the Colstead case. We've been talking a little bit about the current governorship. Let's talk a little bit about Governor Gianforte and the Water Compact. We've heard that, he stood against the Republican Party in this. Is there something to that rumor?
Well, yeah, he did. What he did was unconstitutional. In our Montana Constitution, everybody has a right to that water. That includes everybody of every color and every stripe. We all have a right to that water. The dirty secret behind the scenes is, Greg is a tech guy. Well, Greg, Steve Daines, Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank, they're proposing a data center in Polson, because they want a data center which is all your computers, Bitcoin mining. Imagine a big concrete structure just lined with computers. Well, I think the seed was started years ago because Kerr Dam, now that the Indians control that, the tribal government controls it. Well, that data center is in the forefront again, and no one in Lake County wants it. This is the issue that you have with Chamber of Commerce Republicans that just care about making money and not care about the farmers and ranchers that need that water. The water compact was bad policy from the get-go. We saw it last year with Flathead Lake being 3 feet lower. That is because energy keepers in the tribal government, they now have 12,700 cubic feet a second legally in paper that they can now exercise that right, and that's what they did. That's why you lose the 2 feet, right out of Flathead Lake. And it just all goes back to bad policies. When your adversary tells you what they want to do, and this is the tribal government using the liberal lawyers when they say they want to take their land and water back, well, you need to listen to what they say. Everything worked fine for 90 years. Now, the first year they managed it, we had flooding, which damaged people's things, crops, docks, all that stuff. And now last year it was 3 feet lower. So 90 years of things working swimmingly, but Montana Power was in control, and then PP&L. Well, their 2-year track record is not good. Compact is just bad policy. And we also see the water rights being taken with the Shutter case in Gallatin County. That's another big thorn in the side over in the east. The Shutters had their own private property. They were leasing state school trust land adjacent to them. They diverted water from their property onto state land, paid the state a commensurate amount because it's in agriculture now. Well, the state sued them for water rights. And this happened under the Bullock administration. And Greg, on day one, if you have a conservative governor, I would have dismissed that lawsuit because your governor's the CEO of all of these entities, DNRC, CPS, all the issues that we're talking about could have all been alleviated by saying, nope, dismiss that case. The state of Montana is not going after folks' water rights. Greg allowed it to go all the way to the Montana Supreme Court, which of course they're liberal, and they agreed with that judgment. And now the Shutters are now having to fight for their water rights, which they've lost.
Wow.
It gets worse because as governor, you're chairman of the land board, and the land board could have weighed in at any time on this as well, and he chose not to. This is just once again inaction or complete, aiding and abetting of these bad actors and entities, whether it's the federal government using the tribes to take water rights or Montana DNRC using their power, to take water rights away from folks. These are all things that should not be happening.
Yeah, definitely. I own my water rights on my property, so that completely resonates with me. So
you think you
yeah,
think
I think I do. So ultimately, when you become governor, you're going to pull us out of that compact. That's your plan?
I had a meeting with Dr. Kate Vandemoor, and I think there's a loophole in there if it's still tied up in the water court, which it was. There was 10,000 objectors. That number is down to 600. It's my belief that if it's still tied up in the water court, that myself as governor, yeah, we can pump the brakes and back out of that. But by hook or by crook, it's going to get changed. There's 7 different lawsuits. There's Save Flathead Lake. There's the North Shore Save Flathead Lake group. There's a bunch of groups that are suing because it's a $600 million industry on Flathead Lake. That's just the tourism alone. Back in the old days, they had to balance the fisheries, the farmers and ranchers that irrigate, upstream and downstream, and they had to also factor in recreation. Well, now that the tribal government has that number for the fisheries, they're exercising it. Where in the old days, the lake would fill, whatever came in is what went out, because that's common sense again. But now that they have that, that tangible number, they're selling that water, for electricity for Washington. All that water is being sold for hydropower downstream. And these are just things that we can't continue this way. I made money dredging Harbor Grill because they couldn't use their marina. They sat on fuel last year because boats couldn't get in. So luckily our county commissioners are giving us permits to take the bottom of the Flathead Lake 3 feet lower to try to alleviate these issues. But across the board, these are things that shouldn't be happening. When there's 90 years of precedent, the tribal government and energy keepers should be adhering to that and doing their due diligence to be a good neighbor, but they're not.
Right. That sounds like some more common sense there.
It is. It's really a common sense solution to solve all the.
All right. So just kind of looking at some of the questions we have on our agenda and our time schedule here. One of the things that our listeners often talk to us about too, they seem pretty concerned, is the amount of illegal aliens versus citizens and our state basically being used as a sanctuary. What's your position on that?
Well, my position has never changed. They're leaving on week 1. I will issue an executive order because it is an emergency, declaring an emergency. When we have drunk drivers, illegal aliens around Bozeman, we have 2 illegals up here in Marion at the Hilltop stabbed each other. drop charges. Well, our sheriff deputies, who are friends of mine, they had no ICE to bring those folks to. So on week 1, I will declare a state of emergency, because here's a fact that if those people aren't here, then they can't do harm on us.
Right.
Whether it's men getting raped. So even the liberals can't argue with that. If they're not here, then they can't raise hell on us. What I'm going to do is, if the federal government won't do their job, I will do that here in Montana. I had House Bill 959 that I tried to get across the finish line this last session, which that was more directed for homelessness, because we had quite a homeless problem here in Kalispell. But we need to have laws on the books where law enforcement can arrest these folks, fingerprint them, detain them for a week, and then say, we're going to give you a bus ticket wherever you want to go. Then we have a record of who was here, and then deport them back to whatever country they came from, or at a minimum, get them out of our state. It's the same way we would have our property. We don't just let illegals camp on our property for the goodness of it. It's not a matter of being Christian, but it's a matter of, it's suicide for us as a community if we allow these bad actors in here. Without borders, language, and culture, we don't have Montana.
Yeah, I think countries are often defined by their borders, and if the borders are real weak, those countries are kind of weak. So we've heard that a lot, and I know personally of stories that I've heard here in the state where, for instance, we had a local law enforcement officer a couple of years back. She was sexually assaulted at the fair by a worker who was an illegal alien, I believe. I could be wrong, so don't quote me on that, but um, that's kind of the point, is when we've got, these immigrants, illegal aliens, whatever you want to call them, coming across the border illegally instead of following the legal process. Yeah, it kind of does, in my opinion, cause a problem. I do see that as a crisis, and so that personally answers a question for me. Um, so if when elected, your policy would be just to put them on a bus and send them wherever they want to go. Um, would part of that policy maybe include sending them to the border to potentially apply to become legal status?
Yeah, I could see that solution. They need to go back where they came from.
Right.
That's cruel. Well, you need to think of life as this: is we're the victims. Those folks that have came here, they're not the victims. We're the victims that have to deal with it. And one of our women or children getting raped, like that has happened in Montana. That's one too many. We're gonna have a zero tolerance on this stuff, because we
Agreed.
can't. It's not safe. We have the obviously China's letting people in, and China doesn't let people out of China unless they know they're letting them out. So the whole illegal immigration thing is just rife with issues. From a national security standpoint, from a public safety standpoint, those folks will all be returned where they came from, and it'll be done with love and compassion. We'll give them a nice state of Montana duffel bag with toiletries in it, but they're leaving the state.
So some swag. Hey,
Yeah.
not a bad idea. Hey, Randy, we haven't heard from you in a bit. How do you sit on this issue?
Well, it's hard not to call it a crisis. It is exactly that. And I want to talk about my veterans a bit. I mean, they're struggling with high energy bills, and we're not giving them the benefits we promised them. And our suicide rate among our veterans is the highest we've ever seen in the history of the state of Montana. So let me get this right. We're given full benefits to illegal aliens, and I'm not giving the benefits to my veterans I promised them. Folks, look, there are 89,000 veterans in the state. And I'm going to go right back to this message. I'm asking all 89,000 of you to go down and ask for an absentee ballot. Make sure you vote by June 4th, because what Tanner and I are going to do is we're going to make a commitment to veterans and install an office at the Capitol for Veterans Affairs. This is ridiculous. And this is why I'm calling it a crisis. So when we look at the illegal alien problem across this country in the millions, some people say it's 7 million, some say it's 10. Could it be 2 million before our presidential election? Easily. Folks, there's no country that is facing a crisis like this that I see anywhere in the world.
Wow. Yeah, I could definitely see that. I've seen in Missoula personally, I've seen homeless people on the street, and when I've gone up just to talk to them and say hi and kind of, feel everything out, a lot of times, some of them, you know, they're probably not documented or here legally, as far as I know. Uh, some of them even said, that they speak a little bit of Spanish, and they've come across that way. So I could completely see it as a crisis, and we certainly don't want to, fill our state with people who aren't really contributing either. I completely get that. Uh, let's we're running tight on time here, so let's move a little bit here to another crisis that our listeners have been talking about. And Tanner, maybe you'll take this one. Let's talk about the voting crisis and the lack of people voting in primaries. Like I noticed in this last election for Cascade County and in Great Falls in general, the school board election, we had like 7,000 out of, gosh, was it 29, 34,000 voters that voted in it. What's your take on the voting crisis and why every vote counts?
Well, every vote does count. We need to have election integrity. I'm all for hand counting ballots, but this problem goes back. It's a generational issue where we have kids that don't know about civics. It is our duty as American citizens to be engaged in this process. If you look at the numbers on the primary, election, Gallatin County in 2022, about 31%, they had 31% turnout. That's abysmal. Flathead here where I'm at, most people are pretty informed. We see 45 to 50% turnout in these primaries. So these are things that we need to start reteaching in high school, to get people engaged. I would be all for, primary day or primary and the general being a day off so people realize the gravity of what we're doing. Because like Randy said before, you get the government that you choose. And by people's inaction and not being engaged, that's why the wheels are coming off the bus. The phones don't help anything. Everybody gets on their cell phone and they check out. We need to, and we'll do that through the governor's office, just to get out the vote, engage these folks, let them know that their voice matters. And that happens with election integrity, making sure that your vote, Chris's vote is just as important as Tanner's, or else we shouldn't be doing this at all. I'm all for the cast vote records being released to everybody. These are things as governor that I will implement through executive action, because we've been beating around the bush on this and the politicians don't do anything. Those voting records are we the people's voting records. If you have nothing to hide, then by God, you should just show us your cards. That's the common sense, rational thing to do. If you have nothing to hide, let's see what's there and let's double check the numbers. We'll hand count. I still want to see voting machines just to make sure the hand counts aren't askew, but those numbers better match. And if they don't, people are going to be looking at 5 years in jail. If you lock up a couple clerk and recorders that knew this was going on, that's how you drill down on making sure that our elections in Montana, that your vote is just as equal as your neighbors.
Yeah, we could completely talk about elections here with Cascade County, especially our county commissioners and the I don't know how to say this nicely, Resolution 2362. We won't go into that on this interview at all. I guarantee that you would have some pretty strong feelings about what happened there. Um, but
And,
let's.
and that's happening in the state. Ravalli County being pushed back. There's a group that just wants integrity. We want to have transparency. In leading by example, that goes clear up to Greg. Some of those 30 bills that he vetoed, one of them was House Bill 797, which would have called for a budget for the budget office to have an accounting over all the money that goes out to the tribes. Where's that money going? There's so many layers of transparency that we should be putting in that Greg vetoed. And that's why the election integrity stuff, he pushes back on it. Or if it goes to the Supreme Court, he just says the Supreme Court weighed in on it. And that's one of my sales pitches is remember that our liberal Supreme Court, they just issue opinions. They have no law enforcement mechanism. So like our election integrity bills that we passed this last session, 3 of them, which are all common sense, laws, I will issue an executive action saying, no, you are going to do those. Thank you, Supreme Court, for your opinion, but you have no way, that they have no law enforcement mechanism to hold people's feet to the fire. And we will do that in the executive branch to get the rogue judiciary back in check. People need to remember that. They're just opinions. The judges have no law enforcement mechanism whatsoever. Our founding fathers gave the executive branch that duty for that reason. That's why the governors have the power of the pardon.
Yeah. Some more common sense.
More that's
I love it. It just keeps coming. It's great. Hey, so
for brilliant. The our Constitution is the playbook, and if we just all adhere to it, it works. It's an amazing document. But when you have a rogue judiciary and you have a governor that doesn't want to stand up to it, that's why we're at a stalemate like we are. All the bills dating back to 19th session, the 21 session, all the ones that got tied up in court. Well, if you have a governor that has some fortitude to say no, that's what the will of the people said. Thank you for your opinion, but we're doing this.
beautiful. Hey, so Randy, what's your take on? You've kind of chimed in a bit on every vote counts, every vote matters, and you seem really eager to get people to vote. Do you have any experience? Well, obviously you do, but do you have some experience in this where you've seen one or two votes matter, and in a
Well,
primary?
Jim Whitaker's running a race against Ed Buttrey, and that's a great race to take a look at because it's a classic Rhino being someone who votes with the Democrats all the time. And Jim Whitaker served in the legislation a few years back. And when they counted the votes, it came up as a dead tie. And the governor at the time was Mark Roscoe, and he broke the tie with his one vote. So I've seen again and again some very close races across Montana. And some counties have a good record of people voting in the primary, say up to 70%, where other counties do not. And folks, I can't tell you how important a primary election is. That's where you decide what your front runner, Republican or Democrat's going to be. And this race is so important that people who don't normally vote. You can make the difference. If I don't want any tax burden on my senior citizens. That's right. If you're a senior citizen, what I'm trying to get accomplished is you don't pay property taxes. If Tanner and I get to run this state, you've paid taxes your whole life. And I have retired senior citizens telling me they can't afford to pay taxes on their home that they've worked their whole lives for and they have to sell it. Look, if I could get every retired senior citizen to vote, we'd break a record in a primary election. And I'm reaching out to you, trying to make a difference in your lives, and I need you to vote in this election. Okay, are you listening? Veterans, I'm trying to make a difference in your lives. All right, we're not giving you the benefits we promised you, and you have an all-time suicide rate. I need you to vote in this primary election. Okay, it's that simple. And I know the facts because you can look at the primary election in the past, and half of you don't vote that vote in the general. Well, that's crazy. The primary election is setting the stage for who's going to be in the general. Whoever wins the primary election for governor is your next governor. That is the race. So many of these races, who wins the primary is your next leader. So keep that in mind, how important that primary election is. So get out there and vote. Thank you.
All right, gentlemen. Well, this has been a very informative hour. I see it's gone by real fast. You guys weren't kidding when you said you could easily fill 2 hours, and we may just do that. I really like what we see here. It's been great talking to you two. Is there anything that you'd like to leave our listeners with as far as your campaign goes, or just anything we maybe haven't covered?
Well, just being born and raised here, we know something's not right in Montana. Even the refugees that have moved in here, they tell me that something's not right. And I agree with them because I see it unfold daily. Randy's exactly right. Get out and vote in this primary. If the people that know something's wrong, your conservatives are still the majority in our Republican Party. But you need to get out and vote and tell 10 people, get 10 people to vote at your church groups, in church on Sunday. Don't be afraid to talk about that stuff. Talk about politics. Praying's great. But you got to get out and get active and engage yourself because we need to save this state. I can't stress that enough. We all know something's wrong. Well, it is. And it starts with the leadership in Helena. Go to tannerformontana.com. Randy and I have the message. Greg has the money. Donate money if you can. I've had a lot of good donors, but I've self-funded the vast majority of this campaign because Montana means that much to me. And I'm not rich by any stretch of the imagination. I'm sitting here in my 2005 Ford, Power Stroke. This is my daily driver, but that's how important this Montana is to me. You are my family, and I want to represent you the same way I represent my wife and kids. Let me protect you the same way I protect my wife and kids. So I'll leave you with that. And then if Randy has anything else to add.
And Randy, go ahead.
Well, look, as your public service commissioner, we need to be an energy leader. Unlike any time in Montana's history, Montana can be an exporter of energy, creating jobs at the same time bringing our energy prices down. Let me accomplish that with Tanner. All right. I need to put that turbine in at Gibson Reservoir. I'll stop all the flooding on the Sun River. I need to open up units 1 and 2 at Colstrip, and I can clean up with a great carbon capture unit. I want to start producing energy and become an exporter. So let us have the chance to do that, folks. We won't let you down. Thank you.
All right, gentlemen.
Can I add?
Go ahead.
Yeah, just quickly, our property tax issues are solved by increasing that tax base. I would encourage your listeners to go on our website and look up my Oracle Act. That stands for Opening Road Access, Clearing Lines and Exits. That's going to get us back into these national forests legally so we can start reducing these fuels and have that tax base again. Basically free electricity with biomass incinerators in all these regional areas. Randy and I have big plans and, big plans with the energy stuff, and all that's a rising tide lifts all boats. So once we get that tax base back the way it was, Montana will be way better off.
Wow, that sounds great. All right, gentlemen. Well, being the four and front runners in this race on a grassroots campaign seems to be a really important factor in this. And thank you both for being present today to be able to do this interview. We're most appreciative here at the station. Anytime you guys want to be on, feel free to reach out to us, let us know. It sounds like it's going to be something going forward too. I have a good, strong feeling that in this primary, you guys are going to beat out, the current governor. I just have a feeling you kind of resonate with the public, but hey, we'll let the public be the judge on the 4th, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, let's try to do a radio show on election day for sure.
So. Oh, that'll be fun.
All
right, gentlemen. And with that, this is Christopher Smith with 13 KEIN, Montana's comedy network, and 13 KEIN News, bringing you the most up-to-date interviews. And with that, we'll catch you folks later. Have a good day.
Thank you.